Hey guys, today we're going to be talking about return on investment and how we as instructional designers can be sure that what we are creating for educational institutions has a high return on investment for those schools. So, Reiser and Dempsey have this really great quote about what return on investment is. And essentially, for every dollar invested in technology-based learning, how many dollars were returned after the investment was recovered? Now, this quote is centered around business technology-based learning, so training employees on how to do specific skills and how that then can improve the overall profit margin of a company. And so when we take this into schools, it'll look a little bit different, but as we lay this foundation, we're going to look first at the business model of return on investment and then move more into the educational institution model for return on investment. And so this ROI, stands for return on investment, can be expressed as a percentage. It's meant to be a form of accountability. And it's a strategy that businesses have been using for centuries and was brought over to education because it was well established and it quickly met the need for accountability in education as well. So, return on investment alone is not enough. You don't just offer this percentage. There's a whole evaluation method with 5 levels. You can actually see a connection between the 5 levels of ROI and instructional design evaluation model brought up by Kirkpatrick. And so you start with reaction and planned action data. And so this is data based on the value of the program and its content to stakeholders and participants. So you find this through surveys. Do they think it's valuable? How are they feeling about what they learned? Very similarly to the instructional design model for reaction. What do people think about what was created and what they learned? Level 2 is data on knowledge acquisition. And so this is data on how much the participants have learned and their confidence in this learning. Level 3 brings it up to application and implementation. So up until this point, it's been mostly how do you feel about what you've learned? What specifically have you learned? And now when we hit level 3, this is about transfer of knowledge, just like you can see in Kirkpatrick's instructional design evaluation model. And so this data is about how the new knowledge is being actually applied to the business setting, and it includes information on what is stopping the training participants from applying it. So you're gathering the data on is it actually being used, and then also what's stopping it from being used if it's not. Level 4 is business impact data, and so this is how the new skills and knowledge are actually benefiting the company or the organization. And then level 5 is when you really get to naming the return on investment percentage, and it's where you look at the data on the actual financial gains from the investment. So again, in a business setting, this means are they having higher sales? Are they having a higher customer service rating? Are they having a higher profit margin? It's this measurable monetary benefit to the company itself. So, when we're looking at the return on investment or the ROI and designing for this technology-based learning, we must, as instructional designers, set objectives based around the student learning, not based around the technology. And so, when we're looking at an educational institution instead of a business, this means we need to know what will students do with their learning and what will happen when they use it. And so that means, are we looking for higher assessment scores? Are we looking for better application of critical thinking and problem solving? Are we looking for getting more funding from the state based on our test scores? And so this is really important to know because we have to start with a goal. Like any instructional model, you must start with what our instructional goal is before we even begin integrating the technology. And so this is important, and we can see the importance of this from a study on interactive whiteboards in schools. Many schools across the United States invested in interactive whiteboards. But once they started using them, there was little to no evidence that they actually increased student achievement based on standardized test scores. So if you spent these thousands and even millions of dollars on these interactive whiteboards and didn't see higher test scores when that's what you wanted, then it means that it was a failure of technology-based learning. So as instructional designers, we need to know what we're trying to do and how the technology will support that. We also must focus the program development around these objectives, not just for the technology integration, but for the alignment of content and the way that we structure student learning. And so, for example, the goal could be to increase student research skills. So that means we want students to be able to independently research any topic using a digital device. Because it improves critical thinking and problem solving. So we as instructional designers would have to make sure that the technology we integrated into our product was suitable for research. So that means it had to have internet access. It has to be in enough devices for each student to have one. It has to be something the student is familiar with that runs a browser, just to make sure that students can get access to the products for research. Then we would have to make sure that we had lessons training students on how to use the technology to do research. So for example, searching for keywords, using search engines, and digitally taking notes. Once that was done, students would then need an example of what it looks like to successfully use these skills. And we as instructional designers would have to make sure that we had an assessment to see if they could actually apply these skills in a different activity. And so that's just the foundation for having a high return on investment for technology-based learning, is making sure that we're mindful of what we're using and how we're planning to use it to achieve a goal. So now, why technology-based instruction anyway? We've talked a lot about how we can get high returns on investment, but why is it important that we even have technology-based instruction? And the reality is, as instructional designers, we have to be integrating technology into what we create. And that's just because there's an increased use of technology in everyday lives. And another huge benefit to technology-based instruction is that it's easier to evaluate the program or the product's success. So in a study on e-learning and evaluation of e-learning, it was found that the evaluation was conducted more often with technology-based instruction because it was easier. However, it's important to note that this was level 1 reactionary assessment. As instructional designers, as we move forward in integrating technology, we need to make sure that we're also pushing for level 3 and level 4 assessments, so we can see how are students not only gaining knowledge and how confident are they in their knowledge, but how can it be applied to a different setting. Because the reality in 21st century learning, the skills students are actually acquiring in school must be applicable outside the classroom. However, because technology-based instruction is such a huge investment for schools, how can instructional designers plan for implementation with big enough returns on investment? Fortunately, there's a lot of frameworks out there already. And so those include using a technology integration model such as SAMR. There's loads of evidence out there that talks about how integrating SAMR from the augmentation stages onward produce higher academic achievement. There's also tons of literature on how integrating technology at higher levels of SAMR increases student engagement. And when students are more engaged, they are more likely to achieve higher academic goals. Also, we need to be mindful of technology integration standards, and there's loads of them out there. We have the International Society for Technology Education standards, and they have ones focused towards educators and students. And these are all focused on helping students and helping teachers empower students to use technology well for creative purposes, for design thinking, to build ethical, safe, and responsible online skills. There's also the computer science standards, and these focus less on overarching ideals like the ISTE standards, but specifically on what students should be able to do with digital devices at different age levels that are developmentally appropriate. The P21 framework takes the content that's already being taught, so the Common Core or the state standards, and injects 21st century skills into that content. So these are skills like life skills, career skills, innovative practices, ethical information and media skills, collaboration, all of these skills that employers are wanting to see in their future employees. Another one is the American School Library Shared Foundations. These focus a lot on the ethical and creative student and school level habits surrounding information. The common theme here is that we want to build quality foundational technology skills and the ethical use of technology into students. Another thing for instructional designers to be mindful of is common barriers. If we design products and programs that are so focused on the technology that nobody has or has the resources for, then it won't be successful. So we have to be mindful on what schools need in order to be sure that their return on investment is high enough. And so some of these common barriers are lack of resources and funding, educator attitudes, funding and time for professional development, as well as student knowledge and skills with the technology. And so if we want schools to have a high return on investment, we have to make sure that the technology we're choosing to integrate into our programs is something that the school has the funds and the time necessary to integrate well, so that student cognitive load isn't so focused on just using the device, but it's actually focused on acquiring new knowledge and skills.